Hi, everybody. My name is John Carson. I'm the director of the Eisenberg Institute for Historical Studies. We are so pleased to be partnering with the University of Michigan's Inclusive History Project to welcome you to today's symposium, Approaches to Oral History and the Work of Inclusive History. We hope those of you able to join us here in Tisch have been able to grab some lunch. For those participating over Zoom, we trust you had some time to get some food and to settle in for what I know will be a scintillating conversation. As some of you will know, one of the first projects undertaken by the IHP has been to investigate and contextualize the 1817 treaty at the foot of the rapids, Fort Meigs, in which 1,920 acres of land were granted by the Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Shawnee, and Wendat Native peoples for a college at Detroit, in which Native peoples would be eligible to enroll. The new Ann Arbor home for what became the University of Michigan was purchased through the sale of that land, part of a broad story of indigenous land dispossession and the continual failures to abide by the moral obligations of treaties that characterizes the history of Native American Euro relations throughout the Great Lakes region and much of North America, and also lies at the center of the IHP's 1817 project. While we cannot undo the injustices already committed, we can hope that efforts such as the IHP's will spur and other institutions to undertake the work of memorialization and repair that this history reveals as crucial. Before I turn to introducing today's speakers, I have three quick logistical and sort of thank you notes to put out there. First, CART option captions are available for those in person or on Zoom. We will also be able to provide a recording after the event. So if you need any of those, let us know and we can provide that. Second, we want to thank our ASL interpreters and CART captioner, Cassie Watson, ASL, Stephanie Beatty, ASL, and Julia King, CART, attending remotely. Third, we owe a great deal of thanks to all of those who have been working behind the scenes and in front of us all to help organize this event, including Jenny Brady, Jennifer Juncker, Maya Khan, and Kennedy Clark for the IHP, and Greg Parker and Elizabeth Collins for the Eisenberg Institute, as well as those who have made the food and will clean up after we are all done. Let's give them all a round of applause. Now for our speakers and moderator. Camron Michael Amin is professor of Middle East and Iranian Diaspora Studies at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. His research is focused on state feminism in Iran, the Iranian press and media in the 20th century, and most recently, oral history and Iranian diaspora studies. He also serves as the coordinator for the recently launched Middle East Studies major at Dearborn and as the IHP research director for the Dearborn campus. Alexis Antracoli is director of the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan, lured back to not quite a year ago from Princeton University, where she was most recently assistant university librarian for special collections and technical services. She's an active member of the Society of American Archivists, where she serves on the Standards Committee, and her professional interests include applying user experience research and user-centered design to archival discovery systems and spaces and community-based stewardship practices. Dr. Lorena Chambers is a first-generation and second career scholar of cultural, gender, and Latinx history, and a proud graduate, I should say. She studies Mexican and Mexican-American performers who experienced international recognition in late 19th century popular culture as a byproduct of the emerging cultural diplomacy between the United States and Mexico. Dr. Chambers is a postdoctoral research fellow with UM's Inclusive History Project and is affiliated with the Department of History. She is currently writing a manuscript based on her dissertation, From Statecraft to Stagecraft, The Politics of Peddling Mexicanidad in U.S. Culture, 1886 to 1906. Jay Cook, our moderator, is a cultural and intellectual historian who has taught at the University of Michigan since fall 2001. He has written widely on the evolution of popular mass culture, the rise of the modern culture industries, the field of visual culture, African-American art, ideas, and politics, the cultural turn in U.S. history, and most recently, the history of global celebrity. At present, he is completing a pair of book projects on African-American celebrity and global markets prior to the Jazz Age, roughly from Phyllis Wheatley to Paul Robeson. Between 2018 and 2021, Cook served as the chair of the UM History Department, and at present, he serves as the director of research for the UM Inclusive History Project at Ann Arbor. We will have concluding comments from Elizabeth Cole, co-chair of the Inclusive History Project and University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology, Women's Studies, and Gender Studies, Women's and Gender Studies, sorry about that, and Afro-American and African Studies. That's a great title. Dr. Cole has served as the Associate Dean for Social Sciences and the Interim Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and Arts, and is currently the Director of the National Center for Institutional Diversity, NCID, in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Her scholarship applies feminist theory on intersectionality to social research on race, gender, and social justice. The Eisenberg Institute is very happy to collaborate with the Inclusive History Project for this event. One of the Eisenberg's core goals is to enhance conversations about and around history, both within the history department and throughout the university. Today's symposium fits well with this objective and with our two-year theme, Against History, which has sought to elucidate some of the dangers of attempts to whitewash the complexities that the past has to offer. With that, I'll turn the proceedings over to Jay Cook, who will lay out the format and provide the broad introduction to today's events. Jay.
Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Hi, everyone. And thank you, John, for the very nice introductions. And thank you to everyone who worked so hard to organize and support this event. Thank you all for coming out. This is our second annual joint symposium between the Eisenberg Institute and the Inclusive History Project. Last year, we had colleagues from UVA, Harvard, Stanford, and Wisconsin talking to us about inclusive history projects around the country and thinking about how to situate our own project here at U of M. So we're really excited to be running the second in what we hope will be an ongoing collaboration with the Eisenberg Institute for many years. I would also just say quickly, as John said, I've been in the history department here for about 23 years. I've been to lots of Friday symposia for the Eisenberg Institute. It's really nice to see this big audience here. It's also really nice to see colleagues from all three of our University of Michigan campuses gathered here together, archivists, librarians, activists, community members. Thank you all for being here. This is a much broader and more inclusive and more interesting audience in many ways than we often have when it's just historians talking to each other on Fridays. So the format for our symposium today is pretty straightforward. As a starting point, I will ask each of our fantastic speakers here to share their individual projects with you for about 10 to 12 minutes. Once they're done, I'm going to pose two opening questions on methods and practices, one focusing on challenges and obstacles that they've faced in their own work, the other on questions of audiences, collaboration, and reparative actions. Our hope is that these questions will open up a much broader conversation on the place of oral history work in relation to the ambitions and mandate of the Inclusive History Project. And then we'll spend the last 35 minutes or so taking your questions, both from our virtual audience on Zoom and from listeners here in the room. Following the Q&A, my IHP colleague, Liz Cole, will offer some final summative comments around 1:50 today. So let's get to it. Cam, Lorena, and Alexis, could you please tell us about your individual projects? And we'll proceed in that order. So Cam will go first, then Lorena, then Alexis, who's talking at a slightly different kind of altitude or in a different context about facilitating and administrating a large project. Cam.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody. The Michigan Middle East Travelers Oral History Project, or METOP, is a public database of oral history interviews conducted mostly by my students. I've worked with some folks on creating databases like Meetop for almost a decade now. And we'll be bringing the lessons learned from the first phase of Meetop to all the oral history collections being developed for IHP Dearborn. One very key person that I want to acknowledge today who's helping with this is our coordinator for digital humanities, Miss Marlene Madgwick, who's over there. She's developing a toolkit based on our approach to digital curation for other oral history projects to adapt. Test one, okay. As a silent video tour of the Meetop exhibits the features of the database when it's working right, and it doesn't always work right, I'll describe how Meetop is put together. We use Kaltura to generate captions and share interview recordings from a digital archive. We use Doug Boyd's Oral History Metadata Synchronizer, or OHMS, to add various kinds of metadata, GPS, Library of Congress, subject terms, keywords, segment titles, to make the content of the interviews more discoverable and searchable. The OHMS viewer is used to display the metadata-enhanced interview recordings, and I like saying that, on an Omeka-powered site. I like saying that. Omeka allows us to add even more context, scans of primary sources provided by the interviewees, a list of selected readings or links to sites that are relevant to the content of an interview. While the framing of the collection will suggest certain lines of inquiry, we also want to facilitate new lines of inquiry that may emerge from the study of the interviews in our collection. And at this point, I always want to double check with Marlene, did I get even half of that right? Yay. So that's all pretty technical and abstract, I know. But these interviews, best appreciated as conversations, are anything but abstract. They're about individuals generously sharing part of their life experience. Reflecting on these narratives can yield insights that are not always academic, but are always purely human. Once you see someone's humanity, you can't really unsee it. You, as the interviewer, the listener, the witness, the curator, as a person, are changed. And connecting others to that kind of intellectual, social, and emotional experience seems like a decent enough way to make a living. I want to look at two interviews to underscore that point. I'm going to play the clip of the first one, even as you have the full transcript on screen also, and I'll explain some of my annotations to the transcript on the other side.
And then I told Mama and Baba about it, and I was telling them, you know, the conversation I had with him and everything. And then Mama pointed something out that I completely forgot. Your sister-in-law is Iranian.
Yeah, my sister-in-law is Iranian.
Yeah.
There's something that I want to tell you about it, because when they got married, we went through the process that they had, and they have a lot of similarities with Iraqis. For example, when you get married, they have this ritual that they do before the wedding, where they bring things from the earth. Like, for example, I'm not sure. I don't remember what they are. I remember from my friend who's Iraqi, but I don't remember what it was for my sister-in-law, to be honest. So I don't want to say anything that I don't know. They bring eggs, they bring tree leaves. There's certain things from earth that mean certain things. Like, they identify and they present specific things in the marriage life. They're portrayed through those earth things, like earthly items that they put on a table, and they decorate it very beautifully. And they have this shawl that they put on top of the bride and the groom, and they rub these two things. I don't know what they are, but yeah, it's very nice. It's very sentimental, and it's very peaceful. It was beautiful. Like, the pictures turned out awesome when they did it. It was such a nice ritual, to be honest, such a nice thing to do. And I always see pictures from my Iraqi friend, like the weddings that they have and the weddings that she goes to and she attends. And it's just beautiful. But it's very, very interesting that there's such a similarity between Iranians and Iraqis.
In February of 23, I shared this slide with colleagues at a conference entitled The Iranian Diaspora in Global Context. Mohammed interviewed his sister via Zoom as she lived in the UAE. You can see the annotations I made to the transcript to provide the Persian terms for the wedding symbols that Dina described. Dina's description jogged a vague memory of these symbols, not from my own wedding, which was not super intentional about my cultural heritage at all, but my sister's wedding. So at the conference, I presented Mohammed and Dina's conversation as a window on the interactions between two global diasporas, Palestinian and Iranian, and the intrinsic pluralism of diasporas. Not all Iranians, for example, are ethno-linguistically Persian, but there's more to it. Mohammed and Dina never really talk about being Palestinian in almost 2 hours of their conversation, which I could listen to all the time. In fact, this was Mohammed's second meetup interview. The first was with his mom, interviewed in Dearborn. And neither in the intake forms nor in the interviews did Mohammed or his mom or his sister highlight their Palestinian roots. They were Muslim, they were Arab, they lived in Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, and the US. And when it finally dawned on me to ask Mohammed if they were Palestinian, he confirmed it, of course. So on the Omeka page, we added contextualizing material about the Palestinian diaspora. Mohammed and his family, I am sure, feel no less connected to their Palestinian heritage than I do to my Iranian heritage, but it is their resilience, their economic striving, their compassionate and cosmopolitan outlook that they want to foreground in their narratives. That is a totally relatable way of claiming one's identity, but it's not the only way. Let me play a clip from another interview to underscore how national identity can be very much alive inside the transnational context for a Palestinian American. But first, a little setup. My students were conducting their meetup interviews in a variety of ways during COVID. Some did Zoom interviews, which greatly expanded the range of people we could talk to. Some arranged interviews in our journalism and media production studio at the Dearborn campus. Some had a sort of do-it-yourself with a setup with someone in their COVID bubble. And so it was with my student, Aliyah Colazo, and her friend, Mira Abu-Aida.
And like I feel like more
like used to this culture.
used to like the American culture just because I did grow up here.
So it's not much of a culture shock for you as it would be for other people.
Yes, definitely.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I feel like that.
What sounds do you remember most from your visit? Like compared to there and compared to here, like what is the difference in, I guess, the environment?
There are a lot of kids at my uncle's house.
Over there?
Yep. So it's like, it's always like, you know, crowded. And the most beautiful thing is there's mosques like everywhere. So you could hear like the, you know, like the call to prayer, that then you could hear it from like your room, and it's so beautiful.
As opposed to here where you just kind of
Yeah.
hear it off of your phone.
Exactly.
There's a quality to the conversation that is a little bit, let's just get this assignment over with. And I think the first time I heard it, I was a bit annoyed by that. But now I think it's a perfect expression of our collective innocence about how much worse life can be for folks in Gaza. We couldn't imagine it. Even back then, we could imagine a lot. The Gaza in this clip is a source of inspiration, of family, of even religious and communal renewal. There's something very different in Mira's connection to her Palestinian heritage than in the previous clip. Not better, not worse, but more direct. My own journey to Iranian diaspora studies, was it the right slide? It is, yay. From regular old Iranian history, did not begin with actually oral history. It began with a pro bono consulting job in 2004 on a murder case involving an Iranian American family in Pennsylvania. That experience and my attempts to write about it afterwards took a bit of a toll. At the time, interviews were just another source text for me, a way to try to fathom the unfathomable motives of a man who would rather kill his daughter than put himself in the position of having to return to Iran. It got me interested in regimes of immobility and the agency individuals feel about where they can go and where they can stay. I started an earlier oral history project, the Michigan-Iranian American Oral History Project, or MIOP. You have to think about how you say the acronyms before you come up with the acronym. I created that as something of an antidote to the depressing work on the Yassipor case. All of the digital tools used for Meetup were first utilized for MIOP. Lessons learned from the complications of one project informed the ambitions and scope of the next. For Meetup, it was not just about learning about the broader MENA diasporas. and their experiences of travel, but also having my students develop a collection as a project-based assignment in several of my courses. And let me discuss that just a little bit. For every hour of a curated interview you make available in a collection, imagine up to 100 hours of other work. Most of it after the interview is recorded. This slide boils down the particular instructions I developed for students to follow, all in the online instructional mode, by the way. The project work and the project management is complex, even when you know where the interviews are going to be digitally archived and when you have all the tools and staff you need to incorporate the collection into a repository. My work with MyOp allowed us to establish Mardigian Library as a repository for other digital oral history collections, and that was a huge advantage in creating Meetup. And there's no getting around the fact that having a project-based learning assignment requires a kind of commitment to the notion that the project can fail, but the learning must not. It is very unusual for a student to be able to have an interview fully curated and ready for display in one term, but they can learn a lot from all the steps in the process they're able to complete. After all the initial work, what you wind up with is a living collection, which is a very nice way of saying one that's never quite done. Broadening the scope of MyOp to Meetup, including more students and other collaborators in the work, helped me think about how to inflect my existing research interests toward the mission of the Inclusive History Project, especially the task of including more voices in our institutional history. As you can see from this summary, we're going to focus the next phase of Meetup on interviewing members of the campus community. This happened organically, of course, in the first phase of Meetup, but we're going to do it much more intentionally using survey-based research to help identify a more representative list of interviewees and their experiences of traveling to the Middle East. Furthermore, we're going to explore connections between experiences of travel to the Middle East and feelings of belonging connection to the university community and spaces on the Dearborn campus. How exactly are we going to do that? I don't know. That's going to be driven by the survey questions we develop and the common questions we'll ask in the interviews. I have a small team of experts, including Professor Julio Borges in political science on my campus, and of course, Marlene. And we also may broaden our work to collaborate a bit with Flint. Just as I was able to see the potential of linking my ongoing work to the IHP mission, I hope many of you will start to see our institution and even the small part of it that you know on this tiny little campus here. Thank you for finally laughing at it. As a viable research site for your DEI-informed research, and thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Yes, all right, very good. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Great, first slide is up. As you all know, I'm Lorena Chambers, and I actually came up with the idea of the first 100 Chicanas Changing History at that moment after defending my dissertation, and my dissertation chair said, put it aside, do not touch it anymore. And your brain is going crazy. And I said, you know what? I want to see how many Chicana historians there are in the world. And as you may or may not know, I took a little detour from the academy and came back to defend. And turns out that I was appalled at the numbers that were of Chicana historians that were around. Now, this first slide is intended to show that it takes an entire huge village to make things happen. We have received funding from the National Museum of American History, the Latino Center at the Smithsonian, many units at the University of Michigan, and actually my own firm, Chambers Lopez Strategies. Had I not decided to actually invest $20,000 to $25,000 into the project, I would not have been able to have matched it with other institutions, because it's hard to start any oral history project just asking for money. So you got to put some skin in the game, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I do want to give credit to a wonderful artist, Adriana Garcia. She's from San Antonio. She's a wonderful Chicana artist, and that's the artwork that is actually on our presentation. And she has lent her permission for us to use it for this project. Here are the numbers that shocked me. So as we all know, there are 65 million Latinos in the country. 36.6 million Americans of Mexican descent live in the United States. And there are only at this moment 108, we're creeping up a little bit to 109 Chicanas who hold a doctorate in history. That is a number that shocked me. I had, again, spent some time away. I thought there would be hundreds and hundreds, and there weren't. That turns out to be 0.00000295. That's 5 zeros, ladies and gentlemen. That's 5 zeros of when we're talking about the future of the Latino community in the United States. When we look at the Southwest of Mexican Americans and the volume of the number of children that are going to be hitting our universities and school systems, especially at a large institution like the University of Michigan, that actually then tells us we've got work to do. This number alone brings up questions of inclusion and exclusion. Who are the women of the Latino academic community who are included and who are excluded? What does this mean about recruitment, retention, tenure? And when there are only 18 full tenured Chicana historians across the country, 18 out of that number of 108, what does that mean in terms of representation and the kind of work that needs to be done? So over the last 50 years, Chicana historians have transformed the way we do and understand history, as well as who is included in U.S. history. These women and their students have changed and expanded the historiography of U.S. history, Latin American history, even African history, right? We are in many, many fields. So cultural, women's, U.S. borderlands, history of the West, political history, they have actually changed the academy, the way we think, the way we see U.S. history mostly, but also have touched other fields. Now, with the assistance of an incredible Library Ardrey grant in my first year here, we collected the data for ArcGIS mapping. This is a map of the degree granting institutions. You will see that the majority of these dissertations were granted institutions in the Southwest, which is not surprising. California actually, of course, has the most. And you'll see over on the East Coast that the Ivies are they're okay, right? But not doing so great. We alone here at the University of Michigan, at the time that we took this map, was 4. I included myself in there as 4th Chicana to have received a doctorate in history here from our department. There are now 5. And so we hope that there are more in the pipeline and that we get to see them graduate from the great University of Michigan. So the Southwest, of course, is amply represented, but that doesn't mean that we don't have work to do. We know that the Latino community, the representation is growing throughout the country. Mexican-American communities are growing throughout, and especially in the Midwest. If you look at those numbers in the Midwest, I would say we've got work to do. Here are some data points that the project has put together. So currently 108, we're creeping up. I think we might be at 109 now. But since the project started 2 years ago, we have actually recorded 16 oral histories through the wonderful, again, the funding that we received in all those great institutions. And we have 12 interns, fellows, and contractors that have worked with it. There's an incredible Smithsonian internship program. If any of you have students that are interested in working at the Smithsonian in the summer, please, they have an amazing program there. And of course, it does help if you know people who know people. And so I definitely suggest working with people who have worked at the Smithsonian or who have access to it to be able to get those internships. We also collected over close to 3,000 data points that inform our project maps. And so together, these stories we think are incredibly important. The oral histories that we've created are offering an intellectual space for groundbreaking historians to articulate their scholarly journeys in their own words. And to us, capturing those stories is incredibly important because they will be lost to history if we don't capture them now. One of the places where you can see our mapping is at our website. It is chicanaschanginghistory.org, and it offers all the features of our ArcGIS mapping models. It also includes a relationship mapping of who are the mentors. To give you an idea, Dr. Vicky Ruiz, who is now emeriti, chaired 18 dissertation committees And Dr. George Sanchez chaired 14 Chicana historians. Those two people alone created 32 Chicana historians, right? They didn't create them. They developed them. They mentored them. They guided them, us. They gave us advice. They have done a lot. And in the case of George Sanchez, my metronome over 2 decades every summer, like, how's that last chapter coming? And so finally was able to work with, advised me, great advice to work with Dr. Earl Lewis. And that's frankly how it all came about in 2020. So you can look at our mapping. It says up there on the maps. We encourage you to take a look at it. It's close to 3,000 data points. Then Dr. Gloria Miranda, that picture on the up top right-hand corner was taken at the Organization of American Historians conference a year ago in Los Angeles at the Biltmore. And she passed away just a few weeks ago, March 4th in 2024. And this alone is the reason why I am committed to this project, because her history is now captured in our archive. She is the 3rd Chicana on our list out of the 109 that we have. And therefore, you can tell by this quote that we took straight from her transcript about her knowledge of what the future held for her. And she was very committed to making sure that the story was included. We will be honoring her at our Chicanas Changing History webinar in the fall. It's celebrating on Day of the Dead. And we will be talking about other historians who have passed and their contributions to U.S. history, as well as other fields of history. So with that, this is our big question. Sort of the launch of the entire project and archive will be happening in the 24-25 academic year through the great support of the IHP. And I need to give credit to our librarians from the UM library system, Edras Rodriguez Torres, who's a librarian for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, who happens to be a trained oral historian and who welcomed me as a postdoc. And when I was telling him about this story, he said, "Oh my God, Lorena, we have to do something." I'm like, "Well, tell me, help me with this." And he was fantastic. I want to give credit to Kat Hagedorn and Rob McIntyre, who are on the U of M library digital team. Our library has 225 digital collections, and we're very proud to be the very first video collection of part of the UM digital library collection here. The metadata has been approved. The templates have been constructed. The transcripts have been sent out and returned. And thank goodness a copyright has been accepted by the U of M General Counsel's Office. So we are ready. Thank you. That was an applause line. Thank you. And so I'd like to leave you with a short video that we produced, and it is taken from the four of the several oral history interviews that we've done. And I'd love to take questions afterward. So here we go.
The early days were not easy. When we began to study history back in certainly the 70s for me, there were only 2 Chicana historians with PhDs in the universe. It was Charlene Soto, who had gotten a degree in Latin American history, as well as Luisa Año Nuevo de Cur. Meeting the cohort from around the nation, everybody and anybody who was studying Chicana history was really pretty important, because that was the day that I met both Dina Gonzalez and Antonia Castañeda, who were going to be vital in my career for the rest of my life and still are.
Not only in terms of being the first in my family to graduate from college, but also the first to be in spaces where we've not been before, as women, or as Chicana olds, or as anything else, that whatever our identities are. My experience has been to have been the first in multiple entities and multiple institutions. The issues were basically the same in whatever space I entered where I was the first, whether it was an institution of higher education or whether it was a business. I think I was among the first Chicanas at the WHA in US history.
So when I went to graduate school, I started realizing more and more the history of the West was a very important part, but that I shouldn't call it Chicano history. It certainly had no concept, no person whose work was in that. And if there was anyone at Berkeley, they were over in the Chicano Studies Department, which was a program with no grad students, only some majors and minors. What happened in the 1970s almost forced us to take stock and to really look at what we were doing. So many grad students go into graduate school, and this kind of open door opportunity. We didn't have that because we were being questioned constantly about who we were, how prepared we were, what we were ready to do, and what could or could not be done in grad school. So identity played a big role, culture played a big role, race and obstacles and barriers and all those sorts of things also played a role.
Very few people study history. Nowadays, there are very few jobs in history. Even more importantly, in the major textbooks that we're still not integrated, and often we do not see ourselves. You really do have to have professors who see that somebody has a talent. They have to be mentored, encouraged. They have to be given that idea that they are historians or that they could be historians. So today we have so much more mentorship that is possible, but it's still true that in major universities that we are still lacking. Many institutions still do not even have one professor that teaches that as their specialty.
We just need to continue pushing and having more professors who are willing to push for the fact that we need more people, we need more students. Students have, I think I've discussed this with certainly Dina and Antonia, and I've talked about this a lot. Students have more power than they think they do. And it was really, we go back to the 60s, right? High school students were the ones who were protesting. They were the blowouts. It was high school students who were saying, we need classes. We need this, we need that. You're not offering this to us. This exploitation is more than we can handle anymore. And showing statistically the kind of ongoing discrimination, right? So I think that students too, we need to continue helping our students and letting them know that they have more power.
I think it is important to the community, to the entire Latina population, to the society as a whole. Society is richer for knowing who we are. Thank you.
Every historian can make a difference. We can make a difference in the classroom with our publications in our community. Thank you for this project.
I thank you and your team profusely. Very, very grateful that you are doing this project. And so thank you.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this because it is historical, it is important, it is necessary.
All right, thank you. I am going to give a very different presentation, which is not about any particular project, but is instead an overview of how archives and libraries have been involved in and are how trends and the ways that they're involved in oral histories are changing. And so I'm glad Lorena mentioned her work with the Library. Because that's a good way to start us off here, which is that traditionally libraries and archives have been repositories for what is, the finished product, essentially, the recordings and the transcripts that are produced by oral historians and scholars. And so, for example, if you go to the Bentley's website, you'll find collections like this, which is an oral history for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. And this is very typical. Almost any archive you go to and you do a search for oral histories, you're going to pull up collections like these. And these are not necessarily collections that the library or archives have created, but they have acquired them. Someone has contacted them to donate them. They've discovered that they exist and contact the creator to try and preserve them. Another example at the Bentley are the Behe oral histories, which are oral histories of Black athletes at the University of Michigan. These were digitized by the Bentley. So that's another thing that that archives will often do is take older media, like older oral histories that are on media that's now inaccessible, digitize them to provide access. So this is a very traditional way that archives and libraries work with oral historians, is to essentially collect, to preserve, and then to provide access to oral histories, typically today via some online mechanism, because the technology to listen to all the various formats is not available. So another way that some archives and libraries have been involved in oral histories is as creator. So in the late 40s and the early 50s, there were two institutions that began doing this work. One was at Columbia. The other one was at the University of California. It's now the Bancroft Library's Oral History Center. It was founded in 1953 as the Regional Oral History Office of the University of California. And since these first two centers were founded, right, to actually go out and do oral histories with people, not just to preserve oral histories, there have a lot of other centers have emerged in special collections, archives, and libraries around the country. And in fact, Cam's presentation, where he talks about OMS, OMS is created by the Louis B. Nunn Center at the University of Kentucky. And this is a whole center there in their special collections that is focused on creating oral histories and creating resources for people like Cam who are doing oral histories and who want to create better metadata, better access to those oral histories. And so they also conduct oral histories. They have oral historians on staff who are experts in this and who use these tools to provide access. They teach others how to do oral history. And this is something that you'll find at not every library is going to have a program like this, but it's not an uncommon thing that you'll find. Another one of them is the Baylor Institute for Oral History. And this one, I think, provides a good bridge to what I'm going to talk about next, because they not only do these oral histories, they're not just out there collecting or providing resources for oral historians or preserving and providing access to oral histories, but they're also creating resources for people who want to learn oral history, people who may not be experts, who want to do work like this. And so that they're kind of a bridge to this third way of doing oral history that we're starting to see in archives and libraries. It's newer, but essentially the archive is facilitator. So this is an example of the kind of resources that the Baylor Institute provides. And they're an oral history institute. They're doing a lot of work similar to what's happening at the Bancroft Library or what's happening at the Nunn Center. But then they're also producing these guides for the public to learn more about how to do oral history. And so this is a general trend in the field. As seeing the archive as the facilitator of oral history and being a facilitator as a reparative practice. So to capture the histories of communities and people who have been left out of the historical record. The idea is to center the community rather than to center the archive, and to shift the locus of control to the community to decide what to capture, how to capture it, what to preserve, and what to provide access to, which is an effort to reverse and repair the more traditionally extractive nature of archival practice, which really seeks to collect from people and communities for the benefit of institutions and researchers who are not typically from those communities. So an example of this that staff at my last institution did is they created a project called My Princeton Oral History. I mean, I don't know how you'd pronounce this, Cam, but this was, my colleagues, Valencia Johnson, the archivist for Student Life, Amanda Ferrara, one of the public services archivists, and the digital archivist Annalise Berdini collaborated to design and implement and market this effort. And the idea was to empower students who felt left out of the dominant Princeton narrative to capture and share their experiences. It included a lot of PR, a lot of training. There are videos. There's a guide, a written guide to doing oral history that's now on the library webpage. You can see it here, and it's really geared towards students. So you see it looks a lot different than the Nunn Center, but it, it talks about how to do interviewing. It has links to release forms so that the histories can come to the archives. And then there's this oral history kit that you can check out from the archives. So you just go into your library account, you put in the request, you come, you check this kit out, and it includes everything you need to produce a pretty high quality oral history. It includes microphones, it includes the release forms, it includes the instructions, it includes a recorder, it includes an interview prompt sheet, and a Creative Commons copyright flow chart. It launched in late 2019, and I will say it was kind of the pandemic sort of set it a little bit off course. But the three archivists who created this program, Valencia, Amanda, and Annalise, often describe their project when they would describe it as decentering the archives. And this approach really emerged around the same time that other archives were doing this kind of work, which is to see the archive as facilitator, and then to let the people doing those oral histories send them to the archives if they wanted to. So another example here is from the University of California, Irvine, and this is more focused on communities in the local area, and it provides resources on doing oral history to community members. It's part of their community-focused archives program at UCI. And they define it as a collaborative, responsive to community needs, and attentive to inequalities in the archives program. The Brooklyn Historical Society has their OMA, their oral history office. This is kind of a mixed model where they are still doing the oral histories, but they're working very closely with the community, and they're constantly gathering feedback and adjusting what they're doing so that the community has more control than they might have. And they're focused on capturing the histories of mixed heritage New Yorkers. Community archives are also suddenly starting to do this. So the Trans Oral History Project in New York City is a great example of a community archive. It's not institutionally affiliated with any other library or archives, but the New York Public Library is providing them the space, they're providing them resources, and they're agreeing to host the interviews once they're completed. So it's not a project of the New York Public Library, but it's a collaboration, and the Trans Oral History Project is running it. And then finally, closer to home, some of you may have heard of the Black Bottom Archives in Detroit. And one of their big projects right now is to create oral histories of folks who either lived in or had family members who lived in the Black Bottom neighborhood in Detroit in the 40s and 50s. And they are running community workshops and trainings to teach people in their community to do these oral histories. And then they have a website where they provide access to them. And they're entirely like community run. They're a nonprofit. that focuses on documenting the history of Black Bottom and Black Detroit. And this is one of their central projects at this time. So on that note, I think questions are next.
Thank you all. That was terrific, and it's really interesting and fun to learn more about these remarkable projects that you're developing. So as promised, we're going to begin with two kind of broad questions to get things rolling. The first one we wanted to ask you about are challenges, obstacles, lessons learned in the practice of doing these kinds of projects. I will say from 2004 to 2007, I was director of graduate studies for the American Culture Program. And I remember a moment not so long ago when oral history was often described, I think somewhat naively, as kind of the answer to all of our research problems. If there was an archival silence, we would launch an oral history project. If there was an activist political kind of dimension to the work we wanted to do, we would develop an oral history project to pursue that activist goal. What I know, knowing all of you, is that it's much more complicated than that. And so we thought we'd begin by pulling the curtain back a little on some of the projects and give you some space to maybe talk a little bit about the places where it's harder, obstacles you faced, missteps, lessons you've learned in the practice of doing these kinds of projects.
You gonna choose on us?
Please dive in.
I'll dive in. One of the benefits of putting together this oral history project with EDRAS when I first arrived on campus a little over 2 years ago was that we were working with the librarian directly while we were conducting these oral histories. So we could collect the information that he needed and he could understand what it was that we were trying to do. Edras kept saying, I have so many community folks that come in or academics. They're like, here are all my oral histories. Let's do an oral history archive. And by that time, it's a little late because things have already been conducted. So that was the first challenge. I mentioned it earlier. It's also funding. Like, what is it that we're going to do? The video was based on Zoom. You saw the Zoom interviews, but we have a whole cadre of also, I was intentional on TV broadcast quality interviews because I wanted the future PBS folks to come in and be able to pull from the archive to create these kinds of histories for broadcast, whether, now it's YouTube TV perhaps, but be able to share that. So the dollars and the funding is also a challenge. I'll leave it at those two. And also, and Cam, you mentioned before in another interview, the amount of work that it takes for each oral history, the number of hours, the transcripts, the going back to the original person to make sure the transcripts are approved. Oh my God, getting those releases and making sure our legal counsel office is okay with it. There's so much behind the scenes that I really had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Yeah, it's so easy, actually. What are we talking about? I think the most important decision to sort of address is, okay, where's this going to wind up? And you kind of work back from that. And if you can figure out that piece, which that was the big challenge for me when I started, is that the places I thought to approach, their stance on oral history recordings was, sure, we can house them. Sure, we can put them on Dropbox for you. And you can make a transcript though, because the dirty secret about oral history is nobody wants to listen to one. They want to get to the part that is interesting to them. And in the Nunn Center, well, the key person there is Doug Boyd, and he's the one who's sort of behind OHMS. And he had this wonderful center that nobody was using. He had all these recordings that nobody was going to. So 2 or 3 years into the process, I realized it wasn't enough to figure out the repository piece. I had to figure out the access and discoverability and how to get utilization, how to do a little bit of what we did here today, which is to make you sit here for a second to listen to somebody for 2 minutes. If you go to an OHA conference, there are presentations that are organized around like listening sessions. I know for historians, you just want to read it and go fast. So I think that's the tool that OHMS represents, that what that does is it kind of closes that gap between the archive where it is and people's access to using it and navigability of it and that sort of thing. But it creates a problem, which is a similar problem to we're seeing in all things internet, which is it's now a forever archive that can be accessed all the time, can be decontextualized, and most people don't really know what they're saying, don't really get that. That complicates the consenting process a little bit. It's not so different than donating your body to science. You don't really want to think what happens next. You're right, you know. Yeah, I mean, another thing you have to get past as a person who's not comfortable interviewing, as I am not comfortable interviewing, is this, you're in there too. So you have to kind of get over yourself a little bit and do that. Yeah, and I think those are the challenges that are going to be with us. It's a vital tool for all these reasons that Jay pointed out, why we want them, but they also create these other challenges. There's a limit to the methodology. In oral history, now there's an issue around what about a person who wants their story told, but they don't want to be attached to it in anonymous oral history? How do we work with that? What about somebody who's in there but then wants out? There was one case where somebody withdrew from a project after giving us an interview, and my students, one of them was a journalism student, was like, "Oh, we got her. She signed it." And I said, "We're not getting her. We're not exposing her. We're not busting her. We are giving her a chance to share her. That's the thing, her story. I mean, if you're talking about decentering the archive, it's their story. If they can put it in, they can take it out. If they can, you know, and that is also a kind of work as well, which frankly, I think every collection falls down on a little bit. You lose touch with the folks. I mean, I've lost touch with Aliyah and Abu, and I don't know what's happening with them, you know. So that's the other thing is there's a bit of a distortion that'll happen anyway. So accepting that. I'm over answering. I'm going to stop now. So
I think from the perspective of archives and libraries, you know, I can think of two challenges. One is what Lorena mentioned, where people just like bring it to you and there's like not the metadata, you don't have a lot of context around it. We actually need that information on some basic level to provide access. So the other, and release forms, sometimes people don't think about that and they come to you and they say, "Oh, I don't have any release forms," and then there's nothing you can do with it. So, you know, it's a challenge to educate people sometimes on what they need to do in order to, if they want to preserve it, make sure that they can. I would say the other part is around some of this more community-centered work is the hardest part of it is just making the connections and getting the word out and like not giving up on that, because it will take a long time. You know, you might get a few at first, like say student interviews, but then it wanes and you kind of just can't expect it to maintain itself. So it is, even though you're giving that community control, like they're not necessarily just going to keep doing it without prompting. And you also have to accept that sometimes it's just not what they want. Right. And say like, okay, this didn't work. But you can still put the resources out there for people who do want to do those projects. And then you can provide resources and support for them.
I can just flip to the opportunity side of that though. The metadata work and providing the context for interview, that is a generally very engaging research project for myself and for students who do it. Yes, it's a lot of work. If you think about the work part, yuck. But if you think about the learning part, oh, it's all right.
Thank you all. So my second and last question before we open things up to our audiences involves the mandate of the Inclusive History Project. And as many of you who are here today know, the IHP is a university-wide research project through the President's Office and the NCID designed to do a number of things, including speak to audiences much wider than just academic specialists, develop co-creative relationships with communities beyond our campus, including many communities which have previously experienced the University of Michigan mostly as a problem in their own histories, and mobilize the research that comes out of these projects as a catalyst to various forms of reparative actions and policy changes. So we're wondering if each of you could please tell us something about how your individual projects and the work you do in oral history mesh with these broader priorities for the IHP, broader publics, co-creation, reparative actions, institutional transformation.
Oh, okay. I'll
That's
take
a
it.
hard one. You do it.
I get extra credit for going first. I'd like to say that this project, and as a partnership with the National Museum of American History, is actually one of the ways that we're expanding this project in its archive. So the digital video files are held here at the University of Michigan, and the three-dimensional material artifacts were collected by my co-PI, Dr. Margaret Salazar-Porzio, who is at the Museum of American History. So she has a ballpoint pen, she's got flyers, she has three-dimensional textiles that actually are the projects that can be used, or items and material artifacts for public history that are housed at the Smithsonian. So we have access to it. I mean, any researcher has access to it. But part of it is when we looked at that map, and when we're such a large institution, and the fact that we have graduated 5 Chicana historians, when frankly, there are thousands that graduate. I mean, I think the AHA says there are thousands of historians every year. I mean, I think the number is about 1,500. So that actually is introspective about what it is in our role in making a stronger future, stronger society. And it's not just as easy as let's just accept, or let's recruit and accept more students, diverse students. Who's mentoring these students? Where does the responsibility to get these students through the graduate programs fall? Is it mostly on faculty of color? Is it mostly on the younger faculty? Like, what are we doing as a department here at the University of Michigan to make sure that we have more of students going through the program and actually making their mark in the academy, right? And so I would hope that the fact that this is the first of its kind with the UM library, that this is a one-of-a-kind archive, that it actually puts University of Michigan on the map as leading in terms of reparative process, collecting these stories, and frankly, and a self-awareness that this is a critical need for not just us, not just Ann Arbor, not just state of Michigan, but the entire academy. How's that?
Great. Intimidatingly good. So. Well, so I think I think I've come to realize that oral history is going to be a big part of a number of inclusive history initiatives that are being funded, being discussed. And so what I would say is that if you think of it as any other sort of resource that you're, yes, gathering, collecting, it won't be enough to have it and even make it accessible. What will be necessary beyond that is something, a level of curation, analysis, and discussion, all those ways we engage the various publics at the university will, the course room, putting it into making it part of your research agenda. There's a lot of ways to, I mean, even what you presented today from yours was a sort of a compilation, right? You told a story, it wasn't just discrete interviews, right? So that making those connections is sort of the next layer. And I would say that's a task for all IHP work. We're going to be learning some stuff. We're going to be uncovering some stuff. But I think, how do you get the historians in the room with the policy people? How do you get in the room with, I don't know, the regents about stuff, about things they should think about? Because I do believe fundamentally, though, the strength of this particular methodology is that it can make certain truths harder to ignore, even if you know the stats about them. I think that's what's the essential power of this kind of thing.
I mean, I would say that our role is really around, you know, first of all, working with folks like Cam and Lorena who are doing this work, facilitating projects and providing community support to students and community members who want to do oral histories. But I think this facilitative approach that's emerging also informs other kinds of archival work where we're not just collecting. I mean, we can and do and will collect if that's what people want, right? That's still a core part of our mission, but also to being open to hearing what the various communities that the IHP is working with want and how they want to interact with a place like the Bentley. Seems to me the place for us in this kind of work and in the IHP in general.
Thank you. So I've been asked to begin with a question from our virtual audience. So I will start us off that way, and then please, those in the room will be eager to hear your questions as well. So from one of our Zoom attendees, a question said, "Thank you so much for this talk, so interesting. I have a question for Dr. Chambers, and that is it perhaps limiting to only classify historians as those who've been granted PhDs in history? There are potentially many more Chicanas practicing history in the US outside of these parameters who maybe haven't studied in a university at a PhD level, but could have similar levels of knowledge and practice outside of institutions." And part of the reason I thought maybe this is an interesting question to talk about, in the 1817 project on Native American land dispossession that we're doing, John mentioned it, one of the central questions we began with is how to include tribal historians who are not PhDs themselves, but have enormous experience, in some cases, many decades of experience doing archival work, oral history collection, public history work for tribal nations in the Great Lakes region. So I think it's a good kind of big question for all of us to think about.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the question. It is not the first time that's come up, as you can imagine. And we, in fact, have a list of Chicanas who are great historians, and their degrees are like in American Studies, American Culture. And the reason we limited, and I'll take this opportunity to answer a potential follow-up question, is why we limited it only to Chicanas as opposed to all Latinas. And the reason is actually as basic in that history is one of the largest disciplines historically and currently, that shows the incredible large number of historians in the academy. But when you actually limit it to those who have graduated from PhD programs in history, it actually tells you about the struggles. History programs are not easy to graduate from. The attrition rate is incredibly high, and yet it is the largest, one of the largest disciplines. I think sociology might be that as well. Similarly, Chicanas are the largest, Chicanos, Mexican Americans are the largest subgroup of Latinos in the country. And I wanted to overlay that 36 million number over the largest number there might be. I'll give you an example. We interviewed a historian Puerto Riqueña out of New York, and just going back to a different question, she read her transcript. She was emeriti, and man, she was spilling the tea on her career. And she read the transcripts and she said, you know what? I don't want this out there. And it was crushing, right? Because she talked about her experience. So we have interviewed others. We know Ada Ferrer graduated. She's Cuban American. She graduated from this history department. But please, the numbers are not that much larger. We're talking like maybe a few. There aren't that many. So we did it intentionally to show that this is the largest number of Latinas, understanding that Latino subgroups, we share cultural traits, but yet are very different communities. To the Chicanas and also historians. And this is by no means to give less credit to our very good historians out there doing American study, came from American studies and American culture, but it was one way to define it. Otherwise, and set boundaries. Otherwise, it just spills all over. I mean, it's a never ending project. And I have that book to write. And this is my extracurricular project. So that is, you know, we've got to find a way to limit it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So we have about 30 minutes or so before we'll do our summary comments. We have two colleagues here with microphones who are going to help us take questions from the audience. I will also bring in some questions from the Zoom audience, but we're really eager and excited to hear your thoughts, suggestions, questions, critiques. Who'd like to get started?
Hi, I'm Callum Carr. I'm from University of Michigan Flint. And my question was, I've heard grumblings from a lot of, especially old school historians, that too many oral histories are being done and presented as histories, and that they're being taken too seriously, or they're being recorded by people who don't really know what they're doing, so they're not actually useful. What do you useful, you know, as historic pieces or historiography. So how do you avoid those kinds of recordings, or is that critique even valid? Thank you.
I love that question because I always feel like people are thinking that, but they don't say it. But some people are saying it. How saying the quiet part out loud that you're not doing real history, right? So, well, all I can say is I've done the quote unquote real history, if I can put it that way, where I'm looking at texts and I'm making my interpretations of them as best I can. And it's really nice when your source doesn't talk back to you and lets you interpret it any way you want, translate it any way you want. And if they don't like what you publish, well, they're dead for many years now, or that, yeah. It is actually very challenging, I think, to work with somebody who's got their own thing. And it's intellectually challenging to figure out what part is a persona they want me to be aware of, what part is being fed by the culture we're both in. And I know I find those questions intellectually very engaging and frankly more honest than when sometimes we're looking at a text where we can sort of write off those concerns of the agency of what produced the text in favor of what we want to interpret out of it. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's harder history. I think it's more difficult and therefore better. So.
Just really quickly, part of it is I have, okay, my background, I've moderated political focus groups in English and in Spanish. That's hard, but you work off of a moderator's guide that gives you the consistency of the questions, right? So the team comes up with a list of questions, and for the most part, these questions are consistent across all of these oral histories, in addition to being filled in with their personal biographies and stories that they want to share. And the idea is that there's a baseline so that future researchers can come in and find similar answers, or I should say answers to similar questions, and be able to put together a story. That's why that video worked, right? Because we edited, and by the way, I want to make sure I give credit to MJ Del Rosario, who's not only our project manager, but our editor and really is the glue to our project. And she edited that, and it you have to go through transcripts and put it together. Anyway, it's to create easier stories. So we thought of that's part of the thinking in advance about what you want the role of this collection to be.
I mean, it seems to me that that's a critique about who has historically had the privilege to be in the archive, right? Like the people who had the privilege to be in the archive are the people who have power, the people who have money, the people who are literate. And this opens up the access to a larger group of people, and that may feel destabilizing or challenging to some people in ways like, are they saying this about diaries? Because diaries are also completely unmediated.
They're somewhat immutable in memory versus history, which is where, you know, that conversation that happens in the archive is between community memory and what we consider established history. And like, how can we, I don't know,
Yeah,
get them to jive better?
it's an interesting question.
Thanks. Hello, I'm Georgina Hickey. I'm Cam's colleague at Dearborn. And as Cam knows, I'm in a painful part of a project where I'm drawn to doing a project like you folks are describing, but I'm also, that's not what I started out to do. And I need to collect some oral histories for the project I am doing. So I'm wondering if there's a light version of what you're doing. You know, how can I kind of keep on the path I'm keeping on, but incorporate some of what's going on here? I find it interesting that there's lots of institutions who are, you know, offering training for oral histories. To me, that's been the easy part. Like I've trained lots of students to do oral histories and they're excellent at it. They follow the script so much better than I do. So I need to follow them more, but it's all these other pieces. So maybe who needs to be on a team? What's a way to do it where the oral history database isn't necessarily the project, but you're mindful that you are creating records that could be useful to other people, that could help folks who aren't otherwise telling their story have an opportunity to while still doing your project, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. And I will say that one of the things that was that I felt strangely confident about, even in the place where I had no idea what I was doing with these collections and how to make them and to curate them, was the notion that, well, if I got them recorded and saved somewhere secure, I could figure out the rest of it later. So that's what I would say is if you have the intention of these interviews winding up someplace, there's some fairly straightforward things you can do in terms of file format and getting a place for them to be stored securely where they won't be overwritten or something. And you can, that 100 hours I talked about per hour, most of that is post-recording. So as long as it's somewhere safe, it's like that book you said you were going to read. You can come back to it, you know, and the collection will be awesome 5 years from now. It doesn't have to happen the minute you're working. So I would say just figure out that piece. Where's it going to be secure that you can get back to it and then do the curation work for display or for a collection. But that interim step, I think, would be the light step. Would be just where's it going to go? And at least on our campus, there are answers for you. But
I wonder if Alexis has a different answer, though.
My answer is just to reach out to someone in the library and ask them what you should do so that when you're ready to give it, you have enough information. And they're basically going to tell you what file format to keep it in, where to keep it, how to make sure that even digital files degrade. So, you know, how to make sure that you're keeping it somewhere where it's gonna, you know, have appropriate backups. And they're going to tell you to get the releases, because if you don't have the releases, it doesn't matter. But a librarian or archivist will be able to tell you, like, give you that information about those kind of basic steps you can take.
Holly and Marlene on our campus, just you know.
Hi, thank you for all of your talks. I'm Ashley Miller. I'm a curator over at the University of Michigan Museum of Art, all across the way. And I had a question, maybe for Camron, but maybe for all of you. Thinking about kind of like custodianship of these archives that are being created of oral histories. It sounds like in most cases, and sort of, you know, with an archivist facilitator, or if trying to find sort of a framework for housing and the resources to do this, you end up needing an institution to kind of hold down the fort and to be a repository and to provide the funding. But then I wonder if you get into the situation, if you're working on specific histories that are working sort of against that institutional framework, is there a way to show, to share ownership or custodianship of these archives with the interviewees, with the communities that are based outside of the institutions? If that makes sense, kind of a convoluted question. But.
No, it's a great question. So I come at it in this way. In the cases where I was doing my work, the part of the reparative contribution of the university was to provide a place and you know, that's the help they could give these folks who are willing to get their interviews and the classes, right? That was they didn't have. Now there are other projects that I'm aware of where they found a place for curation, and they're really the way the university is engaging is the faculty person's expertise, but they've already got that. I think with some community projects, the main challenge is that server space is, you know, a secure server space, and then the kind of maintenance that all digital stuff requires if you want it to really, you know, be functional. I think that is something the universities can do for communities. If communities have an access, have a resource for that, then just advising them on the best way that they want to do it. I think the other issue is understanding if you're working with another community group, which I actually haven't so much, where there's like another organization and me. It's mostly been my bad ideas in play here, but if you have that, just understanding what the archive's for ultimately, because I think there are some things that are put together basically as part of an advocacy project, right? It's important that a lot of certain questions get asked and certain kinds of information is there because it's part of advocating for something. In other cases, the priority is trying to be as open to whatever comes in from the interviewee and prioritizing that individual story, whatever it is, whether or not it serves some other agenda. And that's a different sensibility, if I can put it that way. And I think just helping people navigate that question could be a useful thing.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Reiter-Feenstra, and I'm here at the Ann Arbor campus as in the School of Music, as well as Women's and Gender Studies. I'm also the artistic director for Healing Bells. And with that organization or collaborative, we tell stories of social injustices that have been underreported through the arts. And so I'm launching a class right now that's called Compose for Change, Healing Arts. And so I'm mentoring students in a lot of the techniques you're talking about, the oral history and sensitive interviewing techniques and how to document it, but how to tell these stories via the arts. And I resonated with what you said about the students not always feeling as if they have power in these situations. And one of the things we're talking about is what to do with these stories, because they're bringing up issues that they encounter here on campus related to sexual assault, reporting of sexual assault being believed. They're talking about accommodations and whether or not they're followed, mental health resources, growing up in poverty in Mexico and comparing that or exchanging that for a different type of poverty here in Michigan. But they've gone through a catharsis with this themselves, and they've had to learn that the story, they need to back it up with research, right? Because initially they're used to just telling the stories. So my question for you is, can you give some examples of what kind of student engagement you provide with your work, and also what kind of community engagement? Because that's what I'm looking at now too, is how can these students get the support of a broader community, but also how can the great work that you're doing get out to the communities so that more and more people realize, oh, there are stories to be told that have been neglected, have been excluded, and feel empowered to follow up, to look at you as role models and do this work themselves.
Pick the last one.
No, it's an important question. At its most succinct form, that was a major reason why I sought to partner with the Smithsonian. Just having a tiny exhibit talking about these women will reach literally hundreds of thousands of visitors, right? That's obviously one way, but also because it's insular in that it's about academics. So it's almost, our community is the larger academic community. So if I can even just touch history departments across the country, that would be for me a broad realization of what we're trying to accomplish, right? And so part of it is who these women are. There are many of them, well, some have obviously passed, others are emeriti, and some are, there's a handful that are on the verge of retiring. Like that number, we haven't even talked about the working Chicana historians, because the number is much lower. So it's designed to hopefully change the academy, change how we think about recruitment and the processes that we have gone through. Understand I was here in the mid-90s in the history department. So, I have my own stories. And so there are, what can we do to repair? Ultimately I go back to the IHP mission, like what are the reparative things that we can do? And part of it is talking to others. So who is the audience there? And I think it's a little different. I would hope that these stories inspire community, like school children, to become historians, to learn about their own histories and to actually write about it, because I think we need more of that. I would hope that it would inspire family histories, learning the techniques. We don't need, everything to go into the Bentley, but to collect family histories so that future generations and families can have those. And so those are the two areas that I see our work actually going out.
I think one of your question reminded me of one of the most common things I heard in the first oral history project I worked on, the Iranian American one, where people would say, a number of people, these are in many cases, people who've got sort of established careers, highly educated, they have reason to think they're somebody, and yet, despite that, I sought them out to speak with them. Manchibai Begum, what should I say? What should I say? They didn't think. It's startling to me that folks who are, to me, very obviously impressive don't think their stories are worth telling. And I think that basic sort of thing, when they would say that, my answer became, whatever you want to say is what I want to hear. That would become my answer back to them. And before I started, I had no idea of that, but that's person to person, that it takes time. The other thing I would say is I realized shortly after I started the Iranian American Project that my dream is not to interview every Iranian American in Michigan. Rather, I would wish that colleagues at Michigan Tech, MSU, this campus, wherever, would have a project sort of like mine, because it was designed to be sustainable for me and replicable. We're using resources. OMS is free, so that having that model be replicable, or one like yours, I think that's another way to broaden it out, because it's surprising how many people don't think themselves they are worth talking to, even when it seems obvious to us why we want to talk to them.
Some of that is from having been representatives, that they haven't seen prototypes, people talking about some things usually meeting.
Wanted to throw in another question from our Zoom audience, and I was going to direct this to Alexis, if that's okay. So one of our Zoom attendees, Deborah Richmond, is a colleague who's working with us on the 1817 project. Deborah is the tribal historian for the Burt Lake Band in northern Michigan. And she asks, is it possible to collect oral histories but allow non-tribal people to use them on a limited basis who are working with us. And it kind of opens up, I think, this much larger question about these different forms of collaboration and partnership and co-creation, the kinds of layers, you know, or thresholds of autonomy, you know, which things are done together, which things are done with some distance, you know, and autonomy. And I wondered, Alexis, in some of the models that you've been looking at nationally, thinking about the work you've done at Princeton, the Community Archives Project you're starting to think about with us here, do you have any kind of advice or context about good examples that, you know, you think might be helpful to work with?
I mean, the ability to restrict access to something like that only to certain people is entirely doable with technology. And there certainly is within archives a lot of thinking happening about whether Indigenous materials in our collections that stay in our collections should be entirely publicly available. That some of them may be materials for which tribal communities should have to provide approval to people outside of the community to access. I think it's a little more complicated at a public university. And so that, you know, I don't know what the legal, whether legally we would be able to do that. Ethically, I think that is a model that places are starting to implement. I know it's happening at private institutions. So those models are happening, not particularly, I can't think of one with oral history, but knowing enough about how access to AV is provided and even images, you could do that. It's technically possible. So it's probably just about finding an institutional partner who's willing essentially to work with you to provide that service and to manage the collection in that way. Or I think the other model would be to sort of maybe find an institutional partner who could provide advice and guidance on how that could be implemented by the community themselves with resources that they had available to them.
If you saw me squirming in my seat, it's because, especially if you're talking something that's digitized, doesn't matter what promise you make, you can't keep it in terms of limiting access. Ultimately, if it's out there in any way, it's very easy to screen capture or whatever. So it's not a promise you can make. So the first question I'd say to somebody is, I want to restrict access. I said, well, do you want to digitize it? And the answer might be no, and that's okay. The person who withdrew from our project before we destroyed our copy, we just said, well, do you want a copy for yourself? That's okay too. And I just think, you know, some things are not for everybody, you know, and sort of choosing to let things go, to let you build trust. I think you'll build more trust with your project over time if you basically say, I'm not going to get everything. People can quit this, and that's fine. I think, and then in the consenting process is very important. I know that in university we have this sort of exempt status for oral history, but there's also this consenting thing you need to think about through IRB, and that's, I think, more important than it used to be because of the digital forever problem. I mean, it's worth, what is this going to be for? You know, and sometimes it's not for this, and that's okay.
You. I think you were next.
Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. I'm Sarah Polno, a PhD student at Notre Dame. My question is kind of about the future of oral history. There's been a lot of discussion of decentering archives or rendering them more reparative. But there are also a lot of archives that we could imagine being found archives in oral history. I'm thinking YouTube, I'm thinking Spotify, I'm thinking vlogs. And in my graduate training, I haven't found anyone kind of trying to teach us how to data mine to find what people are already putting out there without consent forms, but on these publicly available platforms. Do you see archives working to kind of systematically find and link to some of the extant content, or do you see greater integration, perhaps at lower cost, with the internet ecosystem somehow in the future of oral history? Thank you.
Archives are already certainly collecting digital material that's out there and that are on those platforms. What you're talking about, though, raises a host of rights issues, and like that's where it becomes really complicated for collecting institutions. So, you know, if a donor comes to us and says, hey, I have a YouTube channel and I want, or we go to someone has a YouTube channel and we have a conversation with them, we certainly technologically can acquire that material, but to just link to it, the other part of it is, will it be there, right? Will it be there tomorrow, or will it be there in 10 years? You know, both things on the things that are digital are both forever and also not like they disappear very quickly. They're very ephemeral, like they're both things. And so, you know, it's a complicated problem. It's not that archivists aren't thinking about it or aren't doing it. We have, I think I saw, I forget the exact number, but many terabytes of digital material at the Bentley Library. That's come in all different kinds of formats. A lot of that is actually AV material because digital AV material is really large. But I would say it's all material for the most part that we have collected through some kind of process where we're working with the donor. Web archiving is a little bit different. You can crawl websites and, you know, if people don't want their website crawled, they can put a robots TXT on their website, which will tell the crawler, don't crawl the website. So we can use that. But there's nothing really systematic happening.
Anthony?
So thank you all so much for this really great panel. I'm Anthony Mora, and I'm a faculty member here in history in Ann Arbor. And my question is actually more specifically for Lorena, which is a few times you've alluded to how your particular career trajectory in two different places, in academia and outside of academia, have informed the project. But I wonder if you could talk more concretely about that. You know, what are the particular skills that you're drawing from both? How did the experience of being focused more on one career at a certain moment than at the other, what does that give you in terms of perspective and the way you frame this particular project?
Thanks. I'll try to keep it very short. I mean, the epiphany was, first of all, I defended during the pandemic. So it was over Zoom. I didn't have any colleagues to celebrate. And I honestly, because I had been out of academia as a political consultant, running a very successful business in Washington, D.C., I just felt detached. I was detached. I didn't know who, wasn't here. And I didn't know other historians. I didn't know the latest works. And so that was a lot of work in terms of my bibliography for my dissertation. But I called up the friends I did have. So I called up Natalia Molina. I'm like, hey, girl, how are you? And there was this list, Anthony, there was this list that came up in the 90s that was set by Antonia Castañeda. And I remember sitting at a conference in Chicago. It was either OAH, WHA, probably not WHA at that point, but OAH. And she said, and this is in the mid-90s, when you graduate, you're going to be only the 29th Chicana with a PhD in history. And it was a list that she was putting together because for decades now, and they could see the future, there were just so few of us. So that epiphany, again, I mentioned it earlier, I thought there would be hundreds. I thought there would be 500 of it. I just thought there were so many. And I was in complete and total shock when Natalia said to me, she's like, I lost track at like number 50, but Vicky Ruiz has it. So I called Vicky, right? And Vicky Ruiz and I spoke, and that actually created a fuller list. So I consider that list as an archival document that happened in the 90s. This project is a remnant of that. At the time, so when we did the math, then I ended up at like 99 or 100th. But since then, as the data has been collected, there have been more and we have filled in. And now, of course, we're at 109. Now, that was the epiphany because I had been away doing this other work. Now, I'm a producer and director of commercials. I direct, I write copy in English and Spanish. And so that's why that video was so important to us, because we wanted to tell that story. So that's why that storytelling narrative came through. And it's just something that, again, the attrition rate is high among students of color. And it definitely was especially high at Michigan between the departments of history and American culture in the early 2000s. That I know. And so the fact that I came back literally a decade and a half later or more to finish the dissertation gave me an awareness. And I don't suggest anyone do that, please. You just finish. Everyone should just finish. It gave me an awareness of how in US politics and the academy, frankly, are so similar. I hate to say it, but at least on the Democratic side. So where I've been sitting with, I worked on Hillary Clinton's IE in 2016, huge round conference table, everything's marble in these Washington, DC law firms. And there are 19 consultants. And I am the only person of color. I am the only woman. And of course, I'm the only Latina. So it's me and 19 consultants who are men who happen to be white. And that is like Democratic politics in 2016. And so I come to the academy hoping to find some refuge and seeing something different. And like things have improved incrementally, right? I mean, the fact that our department right now has four people of Mexican descent is unheard of. And, props to the history department, to Jay Cook, who helped make this happen for all of you. Jay has been involved in every single one of our hires. So just so you know, there are devoted, committed people who understand the necessity for this. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Anthony, but I just thought it would be completely, totally different 20 some odd years later. It's gotten a little better, but we've got work to do. And I see the parallels, right? And I don't know why I chose these two careers. They're they are tough. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit, but I'm happy to answer more if you'd like.
We're just about out of time. Does anyone have a quick question before we wrap up? Oh, yeah.
Hello, and thanks so much. I was wondering if in the Inclusive History Project, any people are working on working class studies, working class history areas that have not yet been examined in the rich history of Michigan with the labor movement. For example, the University of Michigan had a workers' education project in the 40s that was centered in Detroit, but also statewide. It has hardly been touched. And I wonder if there's other forgotten areas that relate to class.
That's a really good question. And one project that we've started to talk about, and aspirationally, we've thought it might be a fantastic 3-campus project, would be to look at the history of the preparatory schools that were created in the 19th century. There were 13 preparatory schools run by the University of Michigan all over our state, Kalamazoo, but also like Escabana, Pontiac, other places. And then in the 20th century, our extension programs. And one of the things we know from the work that happened during the bicentennial programming in 2017 and was led by Greg Parker and others in our department is that there's some really interesting things that you start to see about how, for example, auto workers were participating in the extension programs and thinking about these other forms of education that are institutionally supported by the University of Michigan really force us to rethink the circle of we. Where was the University of Michigan at various points? Who was a part of it? How were they a part of it? Ann Arbor alums, but also these other kinds of education that are happening through the University of Michigan. I think that's one place where workers and working class training, struggles, labor actions might be a very interesting part of a larger project. We're certainly thinking about class across all of our projects, but to think more specifically about workers in this place that's so important in the history of labor unions, industrial work, industrial production. It's something that we're very interested in and have started to think about it in relation to that project. But we're eager for suggestions and ideas coming to us from people who know more about the possibilities than we do.
I think relatedly, we talked a little bit about, I haven't seen a project built around this yet, but unionization of the campus itself. Could be some stories there. I don't know. Could be some inclusivity and some not so inclusivity going on there. Some not so much equity. So yeah.
Liz, do you want to wrap it up for us?
Hi, everybody. I want to close by thank you all for being here. And I'll start by asking everyone for one more favor, in addition to giving us this time for your Friday afternoon. We'd also like to ask that you give us just a little more time to share your feedback in our post-event survey. If you're watching us on Zoom, there will be a screen that comes up automatically when the webinar ends. We're also, we have this QR code up here. So if you're with us in person, you can give us our feedback at that link. And then you'll also get a request for our feedback survey through email after the session. I want to take a few minutes in summation to put this conversation today in the context of our larger university-wide project of fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion. As is very salient to me and probably for many of us in this room, we're doing this work at a time when universities are experiencing pressure to not acknowledge the diversity of our university communities. So I want to talk about what these projects tell us about DEI work and kind of implicitly contrast it to the depictions of DEI work as exclusionary, divisive, unfair. I feel like we're getting that message every day. And I have, what do I have? I have maybe 5 quick observations about this. So the first is that inclusive history really reveals the lived experience of these exclusions at a time when many would like us not to even acknowledge these exclusions. So we saw Dr. Emma Perez talking about being one of 2 Chicana historians in the universe. Another one of Dr. Chambers' respondents said she couldn't call the work she was doing Chicana history because there was no person who did that. It was not a thing, what she was doing, right? Alexis talked about the My Princeton project and how it was developed explicitly for students who felt excluded to have a way to document their stories. So doing this work implicitly is showing that exclusion exists and how it actually plays out. And I'd say that these take on particular importance in a time when exclusion is being denied. And I think Jay said that so vividly. It's calling us to rethink the circle of we. Second thing I noticed is that one of the ways this work reveals the exclusions is by foregrounding and telling the stories of the communities that students come from. When we hear these stories, we have to challenge a view of students as kind of decontextualized learners, right? It helps us see our students and all the members of our communities as also members of other communities, right? So Cam's project, for example, made vividly apparent how the communities on campus are made up of folks who come from other communities. And these are lived identities, right? It's not just taking on a label. It's also identities we live out through our cultural practices, even when we're not naming them. Fundamentally, these relationships to other communities affect students' sense of belonging on campus, right? So this DEI work has to acknowledge the diverse paths through which students come to us. Once you recognize the ways that members of the university community are also embedded in other communities, you can't ignore how what's going on beyond the university affects them, right? It doesn't just challenges us, it calls us to kind of abandon that idea of the university as an ivory tower. And we saw that when Cam contrasted his informant's memories of Gaza with what it means to be living in Gaza right now. These stories make clear that students have different needs and that a colorblind approach to higher ed, which the DEI opponents promote, can't meet those needs. The stories we heard today also, I think, underscored the importance of who's doing this work, right? By virtue of the life paths that people came to these questions through, they asked different questions, right? Lorena asked about the question of the paucity of Chicana historians because of the way she was networked with other Chicana historians and her own path. Another example is having a frame of reference to understand the participants' experiences, as when Cam talked about understanding the interviews through the lens of a wedding in his own family, really shows us that having diverse people doing the history work really changes the work that we're going to do. And so that's another way that promoting DEI is promoting this inclusive work is key to our DEI project. I also was really struck by the way the identities and commitments of the researchers here shaped their relationship with their participants and their feelings of accountability to them. Next, inclusive work means changing the way we do things. And I'd argue that's one of the reasons we see such powerful resistance to it. So Alexis talked about the practices of the archives, about archives themselves doing oral history projects, about creating kits so community members can participate in historical research without having formal training as historians or without having a PhD. It's flattening power so that people have access. It also means dealing with participants who can talk back, who have their own interpretations, who can change their minds about participating, unlike the texts who are kind of, passive recipients of our attentions. And then finally, and I'd say this is the theme that just cuts across all of the IHP, these can't just be scholarly projects. It's essential that they have a reparative element, and that's one of our commitments in the IHP. And I'm always quoting my co-chair, Earl Lewis. He says that after we've worked on the IHP for 5 years, if things are the same on campus, then we failed, right? So it's key that these works have a reparative element. And part of that repair depends on the process itself, the process of engagement, our methods. And here I want to leave you with the last quote that's going to stay with me today. Cam said, "The projects can fail, but the learning must not." And so obviously we hope that our projects here in the IHP are not going to fail either. But ultimately, I feel like the success of the work we do here will be about the learning that comes. And I don't just mean the learning that ends up in our books or on our scholarly panels. It's the learning that we're all going to go through by virtue of this process. And we intend for that to be a process that engages the campus. So these projects highlight how the process and methods of doing the work are a central part of the repair. So thank you for giving me a little time to reflect on this with you. Thank you for being here today and your great questions. And let's thank the panelists one more time.